just so I don't forget, and so we can kind of get the word out. On Mother's Day, May 9th, Becky and I had made plans to go over to Cincinnati and help Matt and his wife move into their new house. So I was going to be gone, and originally had planned on Pastor Gleason being here to lead the service and everything, but I got a call from Pastor Gleason yesterday, and apparently last Saturday evening during the divine service in Hamel, he ended up having what they believe was a stroke, a light stroke. Nothing too serious or terrible, and he said a little bit of a dark spot in one side of his one eye. He said that's really the only kind of long-term impact so far. But he said, I just thought you should know, he said, I think I can probably still lead a service. But he said, if something comes up, he said, I didn't want to leave you hanging. Well, turns out I had just sent Jonathan Klausing a note a few days ago about finding out where he was. I said, are you still in St. Louis? And he sent me back a note and said, yep. I said, so what's up? And he said, well, I'm here through at least probably May and maybe into June. Waiting on, they were supposed to leave last Thursday, I think, to fly back to Africa. But he said at the last minute, the government shut everything down because of COVID again. So he said, we're hoping in a month or two we'll be able to head back over there. And long story short, I said, hey, would you want to come up sometime? And oh yeah, he said, I'd love to. And so I said, hey, well today when I found out, I sent him another note. I said, hey, how does May 9th sound? And he goes, actually, he said, I have that date open. So he's going to come up. He's going to lead Bible study. I've asked him really just to kind of give you all an update on what's going on in Africa and how things are going there. And maybe a little bit of an update on his family. And so he'll do that during the Bible class at 8:45. And then he'll lead the divine service and preach at the 10 o'clock service. So get the word out. We'll put something in the bulletin about it as well. But I think he's kind of excited to get back up here. You know, he was supposed to come up here last spring. And then COVID hit and squelched all of that. So I'm kind of excited about him getting to come. Unfortunately, I won't get to see him. But I'm excited about him being able to come up again. I think he is as well.
And we're not going to do a pop-up on that day for it. Can't really work that.
And on Mother's Day, I thought that might be a little awkward for folks. So
Is his family
Is
coming?
family coming?
I don't even know. We haven't talked that much about it. Things were evolving pretty rapidly this morning. I was on the phone with Rose Gasperson's daughter. Rose passed away last night.
Oh,
She finally fell asleep in the Lord, and while I was talking to her, I got 3 other phone calls. So in between, I was sending out these emails. So, but at least I think there'll be somebody here in my absence. And Rose is going to have a private service out at the cemetery on Saturday morning. So I thought I was going to leave for my mom's tomorrow, but I'm no longer going to do that. I'm just going to stick around here. So, but anyway, hopefully people will be where they're supposed to be on the 9th. So that's just a reminder. Tonight, chapter 3 of Daniel. And I think I'd like to get started if someone wouldn't mind reading the little introductory paragraph on our little study guide.
in chapter 3, we will again see God delivering his people from great adversity. And he does so by sending someone into that adversity with them. Despite almost unimaginable pressure to go along with the world around them, or to even just act like they are, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego choose instead to fear, love, and trust in God above all things.
All right. So the stage is set for a pretty familiar story. It's a story most of us have known probably since the time we were just little tykes. So tonight we'll try to read it in a way that invites us to maybe make a few connections that our Sunday school teachers didn't necessarily stress when we were 7 years old. Let's just start with the first 7 verses, if someone would read those for us.
King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, 90 feet high, 9 feet wide, and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. He then summoned the
Is it satraps?
satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image he had set up. So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "This is what you are commanded to do, O peoples, nations, and men of every language. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace." Therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, and all kinds of music, all the peoples, nations, and men of every language fell down and worshiped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up.
All right. So, at the end of chapter 2, verse 47, or near the end of chapter 2, in 47, we hear that the king answered and said to Daniel, "Truly your God is God of God and Lord of lords and a revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal his mystery." So you kind of got a sense here that Nebuchadnezzar had at least a sensitivity to Daniel's God, and now he's building this idol, this other thing to be worshipped. How does that happen? How do we go so quickly from the end of chapter 2 to this idol thing that is set up? Any ideas? Yeah, Bob?
Well, he thought apparently he could build a better God. Huh?
It's actually a nice way of saying it. Remember, Nebuchadnezzar would have been a polytheist. So he had room in his way of thinking for all kinds of gods. And while he acknowledged Daniel's God, we shouldn't equate that with like a saving faith in this God. It was just another God that could potentially. So what might the king have been trying to depict or to accomplish with this idol? And here I was referring back to chapter 2, verses 37 and 38. Remember my drawing? I guess I erased it. But remember the drawing we did last week as we read those chapters? There was this figure in his dream. And remember, the head was of gold, arms and chest silver, the torso bronze, and the legs of iron and clay. Right? And what did Daniel tell Nebuchadnezzar about this?
That was him.
That's you, yeah. You're gold. And so Nebuchadnezzar creates this idol that is gold, right? So this idol then kind of becomes a reflection of Nebuchadnezzar as he saw himself. But it is kind of interesting the way you put it, Bob. He made a god. And that's what all idols are. It's man making an idol. Now, at least in the olden days, they used to make it out of wood or stone or something like that. Nowadays, we make it out of ideas or notions or concepts or things like that. But the same kind of thing is going on today with people kind of making idols for themselves. And then what did the king demand of everyone? and this new idol. Bow down. Yep, bow down. And let's see. What was the threat? Had we gotten to that yet? Yeah. Yeah, it always strikes me that when it comes to the worship of false gods, it is very, very common that there is a threat attached to that. Because they're false. Right? It's about power on earth and earthly power and influence. And so there's a threat attached. And whether we realize it or not, this is very true in our day. Let's see. Now let's come back to that. Let's go ahead and read a little bit more of the story. Verses 8 through 12.
At this time, some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever. You have issued a decree, O king, that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, zephyr, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music must fall down and worship the image of gold, and that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, O king. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up."
All right, so King, and the tattletales come out. And they're quick to kind of throw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego under the bus. Why? What do you think their motivation might have been?
Jealousy, because they showed them up.
Yeah. They showed him up, and at the end of chapter 2, we're told that Daniel took provisions to make sure that these three guys kind of became what would have been supervisors of all these other clowns. So it probably didn't play well. I forgot to mention it in the first few verses. There's that long list of officials that Bill read for us, and then it's repeated. And then there's that list of musical instruments, and it's repeated. And if you count those, you'll discover that there's 7. There's kind of 7 layers of government officials. If we were to do that today, if the president issued such a decree, you'd have to think in terms of, boy, how far would we have to go? Congress, governors, mayors, city councils, I don't know, I'm probably sorry, the Speaker of the House, the Leader of the Senate, the Vice President, members of the House, members of the Senate, members of the Supreme Court, and all governors. Right? He just kind of layers them up there, and it's not so much who he mentions, but the fact that the number of 7 in the ancient world was a real number of completeness. And it's probably Daniel's way of indicating here that the directions were complete. All of the government, everybody was involved in it. They all knew about it. And we find that they all did it. So they universally embraced this God. That doesn't mean they gave up other gods, but they universally embraced this God. They completely embraced this God. Now what did Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego do wrong?
They just wouldn't function along.
They didn't go along. They didn't follow the king. They didn't follow the government's directive. And they had threatened that there would be consequences. Come back to that again a little bit later. Now, what's your guess? How's the king going to respond to this? How do human leaders typically respond when people don't follow their instructions? Furious. Yeah, they're not going to they're probably not going to get away with this. You see, when the faithful don't chase after the false gods, it's not, well, that's okay, right? We live in a world today where you can believe almost anything you want. And we're told all views have to be tolerated. Except Christian views. Right? All other aberrant, goofy, stupid ideas have to be embraced. But the Christian ideals, or the revealed Word of God, well, that is hateful. That is mean-spirited. And folks, we're moving ever and ever closer, even in our country, to a place where it won't be tolerated. And it will be punished. Oh, Pastor, you're playing the role of Chicken Little. Yeah. No, I'm not. Right? There's efforts in Congress, both in the state and in the federal halls of Congress, that if churches won't fall into alignment here, they will be punished. They won't be allowed to do certain things. They'll have their tax-exempt certificate taken away. Their leaders can be jailed. Joe and I sometimes talk about how when we upload videos to YouTube, that's Google, and when you upload videos there, they're all reviewed, and we're wondering what I would have to say in a sermon before they would not allow us to post that video. They're doing that already to some ideas, and you just kind of wonder. And they won't, because oftentimes, the king, in this case, and in our modern world, remember 15 years ago, right, when all they wanted was the same rights, right, the homosexuals, they just want the same rights as everybody else. That's all they want. They don't want any more than that. Well, once they got that, then they wanted more. And now they're no longer content to, well, we'll just have everybody do their, no, we're gonna make trouble for these Christians. We're gonna go try to make them bake us a cake. And if you don't bake us a cake, we're throwing you in jail and destroying your business. It's like, what, there are no other cakes in Denver? This is not harmless stuff. This is, and oftentimes hey, look at this false god, everybody worship him. And if you don't, you're gonna be punished. It's not that different of a playbook. It's been around for a long, long time. Okay, let's read on then. 13 to 15. We'll see how the king responds.
Then Nebuchadnezzar, in furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? Now if you are ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, every kind of music, to fall down and worship the image that I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into the burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands?
So how does the king respond? It's kind of interesting, and maybe even a little unexpected.
Sounds like he's challenging God himself.
It does, doesn't it? Right there at the end. And who is a God? Yeah, I know your God told Daniel how to interpret a dream. But what kind of a God is going to stand up against my God or me? Right? Yeah, I think you're exactly on the right track. But Brad?
Oh, I was just going to say that you might be getting ahead. A lot of people you know.
But not mean it.
In your heart, you
Yeah.
really, and that's what they really want, that's what a lot of people do with all this other stuff.
That's what
They
a lot
put it on
of
the
people.
sides, that way they don't, that way they can be in the world and.
Yeah.
and
They
that's
can
what's wrong.
be in the world
And
and of the world. Yep, they try to have it both ways. That's exactly right. Why didn't they just bow down? They didn't have to mean it. Well, because it wouldn't have been right. God says don't do that. Well, yeah, but if you follow God's word, you're going to get in trouble. Can't you just go along? And who are we to say that this isn't a legitimate God? You know, you Christians, you're so judgmental. I mean, come on. And yeah, that same kind of thing goes on even today. And many people, that's kind of their way out. Well, I'll just kind of, you know, I hear this from time to time. If I've heard it from any of you, I'm not trying to pick on you. Pastor, you know, I'm totally against that personally, but I don't think we should force our beliefs on other people.
Right, I heard that.
Well, if God says it, you're not forcing beliefs. Now, we should not do, and the church should not do, hey look, y'all believe this, and cut out that other crap, or we're going to kill you. We'd be doing what they're doing. And the Christian church did that for a while. In the Inquisition or during the Crusades. You know, the church kind of made some of those same mistakes, forcing people to believe. It's always ultimately one of the downfalls of any modern theocracy. You know, a modern, John Calvin and Zwingli both believed they could create heaven on earth by developing governments that made people follow the Christian laws. And that then we would have a utopia. And God would reign in this world. They were wrong. And because of human being, it always gets corrupted and messed up. But yeah, it's that same kind of a notion going on here. And this struggle between this false notion. And I think, yeah, the king's final question there is who does he think he is? You know. But yeah, the temptation is, well, let's just be quiet, let's go along, let's not rock the boat. Well, that doesn't jive well with the whole story of Daniel. In Daniel, we're given kind of an example of how to be in the world but not of it. But it's challenging. I mean, the thought of getting, I don't want to get thrown in jail. I hope it never comes to that. I believe it easily could. And I hope and pray that if that time comes, I hope I am thrown in jail. Because if I'm not, I worry about how faithful I have remained. Because sometimes it's hard. Pastors face this all the time. All the time. In ways that most people never even understand. Couple comes in, we want to get married, we're living together. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Are you going to suggest no? Parents, grandparents are going to be pissed off. They're going to be upset. They're going to threaten to leave the church. What do I do? And there's a whole host of, we want to do this, Pastor, and we should get to do it. It's our church. Well, that may not be helpful to the flock. Well, who are you? I don't know a pastor that likes to be disliked. I don't know any of them. We would all love to get along and have harmony all the time. But sometimes you've got to stand up and say no. And we screw up. I mean, so we're not blameless in the whole thing. But there's always a temptation. I mean, come on, guys. When you were young, how readily acceptable was it for couples to live together before they were married? Yeah. How readily acceptable was it for older people that had been widowed or had gotten divorced? How acceptable was it for them to shack up and live together? That wasn't okay either. Nowadays, Pastor, it'll affect their Social Security. You can't expect them to get married. It will affect their Social Security. That is unreasonable for you to expect that. No, it's wrong. And hopefully you hear me say, I know the confirmants do, sex before marriage is wrong. Sex outside of marriage is wrong. That goes for old folks, young folks, in-between folks, any folks. And that's just the reality. But how much will that be generally applauded by the congregation? Gosh, can't we get a pastor that'll just drop that, won't be such a stickler for that? And this whole business about close communion, can't we just get a guy who doesn't care so much? It would make our lives so much easier. It's the temptation is to just kind of go along and, well, I didn't mean it, or
Happens with funerals too. Person was a member 40 years ago, I haven't seen him for 20 years, he suddenly dies, and he wants to be a funeral minister. And I think, well, why?
Yeah.
All I can say is why, about
Yeah.
pastor.
No, that's another good one.
Too late for most people though.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
It's just the people.
But it's,
So have your funeral outside or wherever you worship, if you
yeah,
barn,
yeah.
on the farm, wherever you worship.
Yeah, that works. That works. As long as those people got dropped out of the church a long time ago. But what about the people we dropped 2 or 3 years ago? When one of them comes back and they're related to some of you and they want their funeral here and I say no. Oh, Pastor Holly, he's a jerk. You know, how mean. And, he's the one who kicked them out anyway. They kind of did that to themselves by never coming, by never supporting the church. But no, it is a real challenge. I got 2 calls today, interestingly enough, from brother pastors that are wrestling with that very issue right now. And they're in trouble in their congregations because they're trying to say that's probably not proper, not right. And the congregations are upset with it. So, it happens. More times than we realize.
would it make a difference, I'm thinking funerals or weddings, if the member or not past member is in good standing at another church? That would be different, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean,
There's
there's lots of,
in another LCMS church.
yeah. Well, that makes it a different circumstance, I think.
I think
And there are all the permutations of that. And my confirmation kids don't even try anymore. Almost every class of confirmations, they come in and they like to play the what if game. But Pastor, what if he couldn't walk and he was run over by a deer, and after that he was severely retarded so he couldn't really, then would it be different? No, it's the same. But what if he had cancer and he only had 2.5 weeks to live? No, it'd be the same. And his family had $1 million. Ain't right? You just keep adding on these circumstances, hoping finally that then I do it. Well, then you should let my brother do it. And then the exception becomes the rule. And I know there's a tendency to kind of smirk at that. Trust me, that happens a lot. People will search for the exception. And once they find an exception, well, then how can you deny it to these people? It's hard. It's hard. Let's see. Now we have verses 16 to 18. You have the response of these 3 guys. This is something, and you guys are probably all smarter than I am. I missed this in Sunday school. I never appreciated this until I was studying for my Old Testament competency exam when I was starting at the seminary. And I was reading through these Old Testament stories again in preparation for that exam. And I reread this story and I went, whoa, that is mind-blowing. So verses 16 to 18.
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have sent us.
So how did the three men respond?
They're not afraid.
Right. And I kind of thought that's how the story ended. That's what I remember from a kid. They had faith. That's what we need to do. But their answer was even more than that. You see, they didn't just believe that God could save them, and they didn't just believe that he would save them. That's not it at all. But they basically tell the king, look, bozo, paraphrasing here, this is a Brian Holly translation, look, bozo, we don't have to answer you. We don't answer in matters like this to you. And we have no doubt our God can do whatever. And if he wants to deliver us, he will deliver us. And if he doesn't choose to deliver us, we're okay with that too. We will gladly remain faithful to him. That's the part I missed as a kid. Right? That's the part I missed. That is a profound statement of faith. And it's not like they didn't know what would happen. They pretty much knew what would happen. And death in a fiery furnace, guys, that's not a pleasant way to go by any stretch. And yet, we know you can say this. And even if he chooses not to, we're okay with that. That's huge. That is huge. And that's kind of how they leave it with the king then. Now, how might they have been tempted to respond? Oh, by the way, notice what was a little surprising about the last couple of verses. The king doesn't have them immediately thrown into the fiery furnace. Right? His edict was, if any should not bow down, they must be thrown immediately. Right? Don't even check with me. Just chuck them in there. Well, he gives them a chance. Then he gives them a second chance. Now look, I've heard that you didn't do this, and guys, that's a problem. So I'm going to give you a second chance here. So something rather strange is going on. You get a sense for how he might have felt about these guys, and what a blessing they were being to him. Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But, you know, what could the guys have done, I guess, conceivably?
Talk about it, or just say,
Okay, king, all right, man, the band starts up. In my mind, it always sounds like it warms well. But the band starts up, and they turn and go, okay,
right.
all right, now we're off the hook. Now we can go and do good for God and help him and serve him. Right? So temporarily holding your nose and ignoring God's clear command, in many places is seen as a virtue. Oh, you're being so tolerant. You know, we need more tolerance. We need more diversity. Yeah, we're supposed to tolerate everyone but faithful Orthodox Christians. Their hateful teachings cannot be tolerated. So it's an interesting world we live in. Bob first and then Gordon.
Mine, probably easy. So the three said, we don't have to answer your questions like that. So that's the three.
Yeah.
Where's Daniel at? time?
It's a good question.
I don't see him.
Daniel is nowhere to be found
Yeah.
in chapter 3. So it's an interesting question. Now, he's right there at the end of chapter 2, basically setting up chapter 3. Because by having Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego put into these positions of trust, he sets them up for the Chaldeans or the astrologers to then go throw them under the bus and try to get rid of them. But Daniel himself is not included here. No, this is just the 3 men. Yep. Not sure exactly what to make of it, but there's a part of me that has always thought, you know, if it's just Daniel that's so faithful, that's one thing. But this is Daniel and now these 3 guys, and it's more than just a quirky thing. These are men being faithful.
And that's what sort of brought that up, the 3 men in chapter 3. Is that a, coincidence? And then as you look at there, 7 and 7, musical instruments. Then the king heats the, furnace up 7 times more than it's supposed to be. So we have 7, 7, 7.
And they didn't have good thermometers back then. So if normally the thermos was at 1,000-degree furnace. If normally it was at 1,000 degrees, they didn't wait until it was 7,000 degrees. It's probably more. Again, they made it as hot as they possibly could. There's nothing more they could have done to make it any hotter. It was completely hotness. It's probably the message they're getting, trying to get across here. Gordon?
I was just going to say, if Nebuchadnezzar had enough gold to build a 90-foot tall statue, he should have enough gold left over to give each of them some money and say, bow down and worship, I'll give you a pound of gold or 2 or 3 or whatever.
How tall, Gordon?
Yeah, it's 90 foot. 90 foot. Now, it may very well, in the ancient world, it was not uncommon to have it plated.
So concrete with plated gold. It's still a lot of gold.
It's still a lot of gold.
90 by 9 feet.
But what's your guess? Would the boys have done it for money?
It says
I don't-
90 feet
Those
tall.
boys weren't into it.
I don't think so. 60 cubits. Cubit is about 18 inches, a foot and a half. So 60 cubits would be, we think, around 90 feet tall. Pretty tall, not real wide. 10 foot's not all that wide. But, yeah, so some interesting things going on, and they are incredibly brave, or stupid, or they have strong faith, very strong faith. Well, how did they get to have such strong faith? Well, who was at work? God, the Holy Spirit. Yeah, we see echoes of it. We see Job. Hey, kill me. I'm still going to hang with God. The psalmist, even if we're wiped out, our hope is in the Lord. No matter what happens, our hope is in the Lord. And that's the same, it's Spirit-created faith. Incredible faith. And do you think the Spirit was kind of scrambling around going, oh crap, these 3 men are about to get burned up, and all they're trying to... He'd been working in them over the years. They probably knew Daniel. You can well imagine that Daniel and them may have spoken and probably exchanged and reminisced about the stories of the Old Testament and the Exodus and all the great things that God had done for His people and how He kept His promises. So yeah, it's really their faith at work here. So now 19 to 20, I think 19 to 23. Yeah, yep.
Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, and the expression of his face was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Oh, and I forgot to mention, but imagine, when the king gives you a second chance and tells you to do it, and you respond by saying, we don't need to answer you. Woo! Man, that's actually pretty tough language. We may not have noticed it right at first, but if you're in that setting, if you're in the courtroom and the judge says, stand up and answer me, you say, I have no reason to answer you. Whoa, right? You're messing with power and authority here, so even that was pretty gutsy. Did you have a
I've
comment?
got a question.
Yeah.
Okay, everybody was asking where Daniel was, but in the chapter 2, it says that he appointed these 3 men to be in charge of affairs, or the province of Babylon, while Daniel remained in the king's court. So maybe he was somewhere else, that he didn't know what was going on.
Yeah, Daniel may very well have been remote from these other 3 guys, so they may not have seen each other often or anything like that. No, that's exactly right. Yep. All right, Gordon, go ahead. I think you were probably, yeah, after Abednego.
He ordered the furnace heated 7 times more than it was usually heated. And he ordered some of the mighty men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their cloaks, their tunics, their hats, and their other garments, and they were thrown into the burning fiery furnace. Because the king's order was urgent and the furnace overheated, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the burning fiery furnace.
All right, so in response to the 3 men's response, what does the king do? He's ticked, right? He is ticked. They are going in, and just a regular old fiery furnace isn't going to be enough. They superheat this thing to the point that what happened to the soldiers that threw them into the fiery furnace? Killed them. And you begin to get a sense of, whoa. You know, a number of years ago, I was watching the Discovery Channel, and this is probably 12, 13 years ago now. I was watching the Discovery Channel because they had a little trailer for the show that it said, you know, the miracles of the Bible explained. And so I thought, well, this ought to be good. And they had all sorts of, and one of the things that they said about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is, well, that's actually very simple. They said in large furnaces, if it would have been large enough, you know, if you go over to the one corner, I mean, there's tremendous variation within a furnace. And so even though you might have this furnace with most of the heat going upwards, there may have been spots that for a time weren't hot enough to actually burn anyone.
I don't think I have a chance here.
And the story actually will take care of that idea for us as well. But again, there's always somebody that can try to explain it. There's always some way to try to explain away a miracle. But there's going to be details that they can't explain. And what I always love what these shows do, they always say, well, about those other details, well, that didn't really happen, and the author just said that to try to make you believe that it happened, but that really didn't happen. Why? Because it couldn't. Right? Science has proven to us that that could never happen. So that had to be just added by the authors. And we'll come across an example of that here in just a moment. What other details? Okay, I'm just going right there. What other details are given that make what happened? Well, we haven't read that part, have we?
Oh, yeah.
They're chucked in, right? Yeah.
The guards died.
And the guards died.
The 3 were not hurt. The guards who threw them in the furnace, they perished.
Yeah. So let's go ahead though. We're going to read a little bit more. Let's go to 24. Well, we'll pause at 25. 24 and 25 real quick.
Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste. He declared to his counselors, "Did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire?" And they answered and said to the king, "True, O king." And he answered and said, "But I see 4 men unbound, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods."
by the way, that show said they were unbound because they were in a furnace. And it's so hot there that the ropes and stuff would have burned up. Duh. I mean, you wouldn't have expected them to have stayed bound up because it was so hot in there.
Another person question.
It would be, yeah, it would, well, if it's, and we're going to hear other things that don't quite add up. But what is the, now, we generally think, from what we know of ancient furnaces, and in this part of the world they would have used to make bricks and to do other things with, but chances are, more than likely, the men would have been probably thrown in from the top of the furnace. And as we're told that Nebuchadnezzar is peering in there, more than likely he's probably pouring in some of the vent holes that would be around the furnace to allow the oxygen to feed in. And these furnaces would typically have been built with billows, much like you might see on a forging or a forge, where they crank the billows up to make the fire burn hotter. And so chances are they were down there and they had the billows going to make it really, really super hot. So you have all this oxygen and stuff blowing in there, which does what to the heat in the furnace? It makes it hotter and it spreads it. I mean, we're not talking about a fire in the middle of the furnace where all the heat's going up the chimney and the guys are all standing around the side going, ooh, burn off, Rob, burn off, there we go. This is a forge, you should imagine that with the billows going and everything else. But then what's the huge miracle?
Fourth person there.
There's a fourth somebody in there. Or there's somebody else in there. What does Nebuchadnezzar kind of observe about it? There's something special. It's just not another person. Who is it? I think you'd have to. I think you'd have to accept that. Oh, maybe it was the last guy they threw in that wasn't dead yet. Later, we're going to hear the three men come out, but not the fourth. Not the fourth. Was he left in there to burn up? Right? Let's see. Good. Yeah, Bob?
Before we go on with that, I
Mhm.
might be wrong, but I thought in my King James version, it said the appearance of the fourth is the Son of God. Have you ever heard that?
Oh, yeah.
Does that sound right?
Matter of fact,
So I'm thinking, if he's like the Son of God, how did the king know what the Son of God looked like since we hadn't
Yeah.
seen the Son of God?
Yeah.
And so on and so forth.
well, let me, now, this is kind of a trick question.
That's a trick
But
answer.
we do get a sense here that this is a divine being. And maybe not just an angel. Maybe even more than that. But at any time, has something more than an angel, just an ordinary angel, like angels are ordinary, but had anybody ever appeared to a character in the Bible that was more than just Michael or Gabriel? Abraham, right? Three angels, but one of them he refers to as Lord, right? And so, Moses, the burning bush, now not a figure there, but again, what's that? Joseph, oh, yeah. But we're Old Testament time, so here's the trick question. Any chance this is Jesus?
We don't know.
It's a good answer. Not the one I was looking for, but it's a good answer. I would suggest to you the answer is no. It's not, because Jesus hadn't become incarnate yet. That wouldn't happen until the angel Gabriel and Mary. But could it have been the Son of God? Could have been. He's eternal. He's always been around. And so I think many in the church have taken this fourth person in the furnace to be, and here I choose my words very carefully, the pre-incarnate second person of the Trinity. We may meet him again on Sunday in Joshua. Right? So, maybe the second person. Now, we're not given those details, so we don't want to build too much on it. But there's some kind of a miraculous figure. Now I want you to take a moment and flip to Isaiah 43. Isaiah chapter 43. And I'm not suggesting that this proves that that's the identity. We cannot say for 100% certain, but I can tell you the ancient church believed this was probably the pre-incarnate second person of the Trinity making an appearance. Because what did he do? He came to his people in need, and he delivered them. Well, who does that sound like? The pre-incarnate second person. That's what the second person of the Trinity does. Isaiah chapter 43, and I think let's just read the first 2.5 verses, so about halfway through verse 3. I get to read this one because I like this one. But now thus says Yahweh, He who created you, O Jacob, He who formed you, O Israel. Fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name, you are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers they shall not overwhelm you. When you walk through fire, you shall not be burned, and the flame shall not consume you. For I am Yahweh your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior. Fits nicely, doesn't it? Fits very nicely with this self-revelation from God. I know, in Sunday school when we're little, we don't talk all that much about it, and we don't want to get called. It wasn't Jesus; he hadn't become incarnate yet. But this was that's way over the head of the little kids. But for us, what a reassuring notion that this God might come himself to provide and take care of those who remain faithful to him. It's a beautiful picture. Again, we don't want to make too much of it, but remember what Jesus told the people of his day. Right? The Old Testament, they're all about me. And so we do well, I think, to point back. Okay, let's go back to Daniel. I'm falling behind. Where did we stop? I stopped you, didn't I?
Will be it.
Had we done?
25.
Okay. Yeah, so we got, after 20. So let's go 26, and let's just read through the end of the chapter.
Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the burning fiery furnace. He declared, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the fire, and the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not had any power over the bodies of those men. The hair of their heads was not singed, their cloaks were not harmed, no smell of fire had come upon them. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him, and set aside the king's command, and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree. Any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, their houses laid in ruins. For there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon.
You had to realize how ticked off the other advisors had to be. I mean, they thought they had him, right? They thought they had him. Dad, you're right. And now they come walking out, and what happens? They get promoted. Talk about things not going well or not according to their plans. But let's make sure we take a moment, and we're provided other details about the men when they come out from the fire. And what are some of the other evidences that kind of prove that something unusually miraculous had happened there?
Clothes were not good.
And their hair too, so.
Hair not
You
singed.
didn't even smell the
I can singe my hands like my grill. I mean, that's all it takes. You don't even burn your skin, and you can singe your hair, but not a hair singe. Clothing, not burned at all, and no smell. Have you ever stood around a bonfire? I mean, it doesn't take long. If you go into a home and they have a fire burning, a nice fire, I mean, it doesn't take long, and you smell.
take long if you're in a building where everybody's smoking either.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it doesn't take long. So all of these things kind of point to a miracle of sorts. Does this put you in mind of any other deliverances that we read about in the Bible?
The big fish.
Big fish, Jonah? Big fish?
Daniel in the lion's den.
Daniel in the lion's den coming up in a couple of chapters. Mm-hmm. We're going to be here all night until you get the big one.
Red Sea, party in the Red Sea.
Somebody was being delivered.
Bigger.
Jesus.
Jesus walking out of the tomb. Remember what his body would have looked like after being beaten and whipped. I mean, he would have been one ginormous bruise. His sores would have been oozing. None of that is mentioned. And apparently, he's there 3 days. How quickly do scars develop? But that's how the wounds in his hands and feet and side are described. And so his body is almost unaffected by crucifixion and death. That's a big miracle. And he comes out unscathed. And there's others kind of similarly. So what do you think then? Do you think as a result of this miracle that Nebuchadnezzar was finally converted and he became a faithful follower of the God of the Old Testament? Allison's shaking her head. She's not having any of it. Why might we be tempted to say that? And remember at the end of chapter 2, it sounds like, well, yeah, he's a God that can reveal dreams. And here it says, if Nebuchadnezzar say, here's a God that can apparently deliver his followers from a fiery furnace. But he doesn't acknowledge him as the only true God. He doesn't tear down the idol. Not that we're told anyway. He doesn't tear down all the other false temples. He just allows it, okay, Daniel had a God, and now these guys apparently have a God, and we shouldn't discount them. And of my followers, don't badmouth them. Because you don't want to badmouth gods. Especially gods powerful enough to do that. But Nebuchadnezzar is probably not converted, and he probably doesn't become a Christian that day. And look forward ahead to the promise of the Messiah.
Well, I was going to say, he's threatening them again, you know?
Oh, yeah.
You worship this real God,
Yeah.
or you're going to get torn limb from limb. And he had just threatened people earlier.
If this were the only
worship.
story that you read, you might even conclude that, man, earthly governments, kind of rule with power, right? They will make the people do. They will make them stop what they don't want, or they'll make them do what they don't want to do. Pay homage to, or worship in a sense.
Science.
Science. See, thank you, thank you.
It is more easy.
What did I misspell today in confirmation? Oh, I misspelled priest. I got the E and the I switched around, and I knew I had done it because the girls were snickering, so I knew I had messed up. But, yeah, certainly science, right? I follow science, and oh, you guys, you deny science.
Well, if you lived in North Korea, it would be their leader.
Yeah.
Same way with Russia nowadays too.
Yep, very much so. How about celebrity leaders?
Yeah.
Are you allowed to disagree with LeBron James? Oh, how about
Cruise.
oh, what's her name?
Oprah.
Oprah. Yeah. Are you allowed to disagree? Are you allowed to say they're wrong? Ooh, right? How about this notion of tolerance?
Sure.
We must be tolerant. Tolerance is the ultimate virtue. And therefore Christians can't be tolerated. The hypocrisy is evident enough. How about diversity? Right? We must be diverse. A diverse group of people is just better, by definition, than a non-diverse group of people. There's absolutely no truth of that. Absolutely none. And yet we are told this must be the foundational thing of higher education and businesses. It's not a fact. It's just an idea of man that they're trying to elevate. How about
Worshiping the planet.
the environment or the planet? And you know, many times these go together. Right? So-called science, and gotta love the. How about fairness and social justice?
The media.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. All right, you guys have done a great job. I know, I mean, you don't have to work too hard, and there are many people that would try to elevate one or more of these to kind of I don't care if you're a business leader today, and you're making record returns on investment, and you're paying out a huge dividend, and you're buying back your stocks to take care of the shareholders. It used to be that would have been a good business. Nowadays, do you have women on the board? Do you have minorities represented? Are you an ESG company? Are you socially aware? And we're now elevating all of that to be, you have to do those things. If you're not doing if you are not fighting racism, actively demonstrating, you are, by definition in our world today, a racist. It's not enough to just not be biased or bigoted. You must actively be out fighting for social justice, or you are a racist. That's kind of how we've elevated things in our country right now. So there's a lot we can be wary of, but we do well to remember the example of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We've got to love it. Look, you big dummy, our God can save us, and if He does, great. And if not, we're okay with that too. we will still remain faithful to Him, and we will not bow down to your idol of gold or whatever it may be. And it's a great example for us in our world today. Final questions or comments?
Pastor?
Yes.
Okay. Do other countries pledge allegiance to the flag, or, I mean, and I know that, is that kind of,
Pledges of allegiance are one of the tools that countries use to indoctrinate and to control their people. Singing of the national anthem can be another way to do that. Using the flag or not using the flag. Throughout history, different commanders and leaders have used all different sorts of combinations to prayer in school. You know?
so are we doing
So-
wrong by doing that?
No, well, and that's where it gets tricky. That's where it gets tricky. And sometimes you can do those things and they're fine. But then as the setting changes, you might want to rethink things. You know, let me ask you this. It's an interesting, mind game to play. But what does the flag of the United States of America represent?
Well, to me, it's freedom.
It's our state's,
Freedom and democracy.
Yeah? Freedom. To many people, that's what it represents. Well, what does it represent to others?
Look at the Christian flag.
Or the Christian flag, yep. There comes a point, I grew up thinking of myself as a patriot, right? Proud to be an American. I'm glad that I am free, but I'd rather be a puppy if Nixon was a tree. I remember that from when I was a little kid, and I remember my dad saying that. And that's one of the things my dad told me that stuck. You can substitute other people in there, by the way. But I do consider myself a bit of a patriot. But I'll be honest, to see the United States flag flying above a rainbow flag sickens me. To see an American flag in front of a Planned Parenthood sickens me. And so, there's times when, and I'm not there yet, but there may be a time when this flag begins to represent a country that no longer embraces many of the things that we grew up with, and then maybe we begin to question, what kind of a role does this have? The rainbow. I mean, the rainbow used to be a glorious symbol of what? The flood, and now it's been taken over and co-opted by a very ungodly nation. But you're not allowed to say that, of course. But so it is hard sometimes, Shirley. I think where sometimes you hear of it is, where should flags be in a sanctuary? And you will go places where they are, right alongside the altar. And try to move them out of there, and it's probably your fastest ticket to a call as you're going to find anywhere. In some congregations. In other congregations, they're a little farther away. In other congregations, they're outside of the chancel, in the nave. In other congregations, if you find them, they'll be in the narthex. Which is a tip of the hat to God, thank you for our country, and for all the freedoms and all that kind of stuff. But it's also an acknowledgement that, look, we don't want to worship our country. We don't want to worship the flag. Because ultimately, if it is co-opted by forces that don't stand for those same values, we might need to, the day could come when I might not be comfortable with a flag in a sanctuary. Now, you could also argue, it doesn't belong in there anyway. What's a sanctuary for? It's for God. Right? Does God, is he really represented by a flag? I'm not sure how those two all necessarily go together. But, so that's a legitimate question, and there's our items that sometimes there can be disagreements about.
We burned the British flag when we were British citizens, so there may come a time when we have to burn it.
Yeah, I hope not, and
I
I
hope
think
not
there's, I hope there's better ways to handle issues, but it does become somewhat problematic. And sometimes, you know, it's why, well, I believe the flag represents this. Well, I'm happy for you. But sometimes it doesn't matter what the flag represents to you. It matters more what the flag represents to others. I mean, we could put in a rainbow flag in the sanctuary, and who could oppose it? It reminds us of Noah. Any of you going to oppose me? Nice big rainbow flag in the sanctuary?
At one time, we would never have voted for that, but it changed.
Yeah. So you'd help me, Kevin?
No.
No, no, not today. Not today. Yeah, they've kind of said, now, would it be nice to reclaim that symbol? Absolutely. I don't think our government's going to let us.
You also can't say AOK anymore. That's a racist white symbol.
AOK is?
You can't do this.
But that's what happens when you sit back.
I don't know. It doesn't make sense. Don't do that.
Yeah. And I've also learned when you're driving, if you wave with 3 fingers, anybody know what that is?
Yes, yeah, because the Germany player found out about it. It's,
Well, that's what I meant with the
legal
AOK.
alarm.
Now this is a wave. This is on the steering wheel. It's a Jeep thing. If you're ever riding with somebody driving a Jeep, watch. If they meet another Jeep, there's a real good chance they'll wave at each other.
Wow.
They may not wave at anybody else, but if you have a Jeep,
Oh, that's the.
it's a Jeep thing. Yep. And then, so it's kind of it's a symbol of it. And if you have a real rock crawler, right, then you'll do that. And then if you get, you know, some suburban housewife that has a big monster Jeep with big rock tires and everything, but she only drives to the mall and back, right? Then they don't have to wave at her, because that's a mall crawler. That's not a rock crawler. That's it. It's only so a lot of things mean a lot of things, but it is a challenge, Shirley, and you know, you don't just start throwing everything out, but you do need to be mindful sometimes of what messages is sending. All right, next week then. It's a rather odd chapter, and Nebuchadnezzar goes a bit off the rails, and so it's kind of an unusual chapter, but that'll be chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar's second dream, and then what happens as a result of that. So let's close in prayer. Oh, Heavenly Father, we thank you for the stories of great faith. Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and of all the other heroes of the faith contained in the pages of Holy Scripture. I personally hope and pray that I'm never tested as they were, but I suspect if I am one day, you will have created a faith worthy of the trial at hand. But I'm kind of a wimp, so if I don't have to, I wouldn't mind missing it. But Lord, create the faith in me that would be willing to do it. And help us to always put our trust in you and you alone, and not in all the other false notions of this world and of people today. Lord, forgive us when we've bowed the knee when we shouldn't. Forgive us when we haven't spoken up as we should have. And give us wisdom so that we might, in a gentle, loving, and compassionate way, stay true to the faith revealed to us by the apostles. This we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.